remember tears were just coming to my eyes as I was looking at my husband, because I realized this conversation that we were having, this revealing our interior lives towards each other, towards this goal of truth, it has to be what heaven is like.
Good afternoon, and welcome to Elevate Ordinary. I'm your host, JonMarc Grodi.
And I'm Teresa Grodi.
And welcome to our show. This is a show about great conversations, about the ordinary pursuit of truth, goodness, and beauty with the two of us. And we're happy to be here, and we're happy that you're joining us for these conversations. So a bit about us before we get started.
So we've been married about 10 years. We met in college at Bowling Green State University in Ohio. We have 5 kids, and we still live in Ohio. I went to school. I'm a historian. My husband's a philosopher. And I think that that's one of the things that makes for really great conversation sometimes between us. It started out being a little rocky until we realized that he's the idealist and I'm the historian. So we're just very excited to share these conversations with you.
Yeah. As I said, right there in the tagline, this is a conversation. So we, when Nick Delatorre approached me about doing a show, I was very reticent because I'm not a teacher, I'm not a lecturer, and I didn't really know. I don't like the idea of sitting down and monologuing or lecturing or preparing a speech because I'm not good at any of that. But what I do love is conversation, and one of the best things in life is sharing those conversations with Teresa, and with family and with friends about things that are meaningful to us. And so, again, with that title, just for a moment, Elevate Ordinary, we want to have great conversations together. We want to invite you into them. We want to hopefully inspire you to have great conversations. But I want to emphasize that even with your introduction aside, these aren't esoteric conversations. We're not here to talk big philosophy or theology or deep out there ideas. What we want to talk about is life. We want to talk about the purpose of our life and all the little ways, all the little ordinary things or seemingly ordinary things in our life that, again, they may seem ordinary on the surface. We may treat them as ordinary, but they're not ordinary. The little things are the big things. And so, we want to draw those little things out, those ordinary pieces, and talk about how they fit into our faith, into the reason we're here, the reason that we're, in our case, that we're married, that we're living out this vocation, that we're trying to seek God and to seek holiness.
In this first episode, we wanted to focus on conversations because, like JonMarc said, we're both kind of uncomfortable with monologuing. We're not speech givers. But when we sit back and we think of, the last 10 years of marriage and like when we were dating, those years are just characterized by great conversations. We love getting together with other people and just really digging in, Mm-hmm. We have a little bit of a hard time with small talk. We're a little awkward. But, when you can finally dig in and find a topic, to kind of like hash out and arrive at truth together. We're a big believer that conversation is a foreshadowing of heaven, to knowing, coming to know this other person that you're sitting across from, seeking truth together, and then of course being known. And there was this moment we had in our marriage where I was cooking at the stove. And we were in the middle of this great conversation. We had just stumbled upon this truth together, and we were kind of going back and forth and hashing it out. And we were just, our excitement on both ends was just elevating, as I'm sitting at the stove cooking it. And I remember tears were just coming to my eyes as I was looking at my husband, because I realized that this conversation that we were having, this revealing our interior lives towards each other, towards this goal of truth, it has to be what heaven is like. When, the philosophers tell us that heaven is a continual knowing of God, being known, 1 Corinthians, I'm Catholic, 1 Corinthians 13, maybe. St. Paul says, when we're in heaven, we will know even as we're known. There's this continual being known by God, and then knowing ourselves and knowing the other souls that are there in heaven. Yeah. And we have a foreshadowing of this here on earth. We homeschool our children. That's the topic for another podcast. Yeah. But I remember initially just begging people, like, what's a book on developing good conversational skills? Like, I was a waitress for 10 years. I'm kind of good at small talk, but how do I have good conversation? And everybody's like, oh, you just practice. There's no book. And I'm like, but how am I going to practice? Yeah. And one of the beautiful things that we thought we could do with this podcast is just have good conversations. And maybe we're not the best conversationalists now, but I hope that through this podcast and having guests, and hearing your feedback and answering your questions, or digging into your questions with you, that we can become better conversationalists. And as we were talking in the car on the way here, I think we agree that right now in our culture, there's a real lack and a real hunger for a deepening of relationship, a deepening of conversations.
Yeah, because we're not in a culture where we are deficient in information. Far from it. If anything, we're drowning in information, drowning in news, drowning in opinions, and much of what passes for conversation out there, or masquerades as conversation, or claims to be conversation in the media or on the social media, really is not. And as we were talking, earlier, something that really, I think, occurred to us is that, what do we really need and want out of good conversation is relationship. That's really what it's about. That's what separates bad and good conversation. We've all been in a situation, or perhaps perpetrated a situation, in my case, where a conversation goes where two people have departed from seeking truth together, and knowing and being known, pursuing some deeper truth together, and one person just wants to get to a destination to enforce their opinion. And I do that a lot. I often, it's a constant place in my examination of conscience and in my going to confession. It's that, oh, I did it again. I ruined a good conversation because I was so desperate to get my point across. But what we really want, what we're really desperate for, is not information in our culture, but relationship. Mm-hmm. Real authentic conversation bears an important resemblance with deep, real authentic prayer, right? Because when we talk to God, when we pray, obviously we can focus too much on just all the stuff we're saying over and over, or long litanies of things, without ever being silent, without ever listening, without ever allowing the other direction. And again, in conversations with each other, that element is so important, that if when we're talking, when we're sharing life together, we're digging into some aspect of family life or parenting, or some issue that's come up, what we want is we want to seek a deeper truth together in conversation. Mm-hmm. But I also want to know you better. I want to share my heart with you, and I want to encourage you to share your heart with me. So a lot of conversation is creating that right atmosphere so that sharing of hearts and the pursuing of truth together can occur.
Do you want to know what the very first bumper sticker was on my very first car? You know what it said?
What?
I can't remember.
Wait, it said I can't remember?
No. Oh. Actually, so it said, question the answers.
Oh, yes.
Question the answers. And I think...
Because you were big into...
I was really big into the X-Files. Yeah. Area 51. All started,
the X-Files.
Yeah, it's amazing being a teenage girl at a MUFON conference, the Mutual UFO Network, which I don't think exists anymore, maybe under another name, but you get a lot of attention. You're not the normal person at this conference. But part of great conversations, I think, starts with asking questions. You were just talking about listening. Sometimes I think we don't ask questions because we really don't want to listen to the answer that the other person's giving us, especially, as you were saying, if we want them to arrive at a certain point. We're afraid that if we ask the scary questions of them, or if they even kind of sort of come, have this question in mind, we want to like shut out their questions so that way they can't think them, so that they arrive at this destination of truth. I was in a meeting the other day with a friend, Nate, and he brought up, we were talking about evangelization, and he brought up the fact that the church, the Catholic Church, we're speaking in a Catholic context, the church and priests are now trying to fill roles that traditionally lay people had been filling, whereas the priest, the preacher, was intended to be the mass communicator of truth, the catechist. We're now he's trying to fill lay roles, so just imagine this. We have Catholic radio, we have priests who are speaking the truth from their pulpit, or speaking the truth in more of a mass situation. But once you get that knowledge, once you become well catechized, where the real evangelization occurs is at the personal level. You have to, as the layperson, you have to take that information and then you need to go into a situation with another person and live the nuance. You have to meet that person who maybe you're trying to evangelize or you're trying to bring to truth in some way. You have to recognize that you are a person that doesn't have perfect truth. They are a person that doesn't have perfect truth. And I feel like the best way to deal with that is the personal to person conversation. Yeah.
Because sometimes, the urge is, especially for people of principle, people of faith, we get that worry, that anxiety, which again is a lack of trust in God, this anxiety that if I don't drive home this point, this person's going to be lost, and I have to save them, But we can't force another person to truth. We can't force them to be good. We can't force them to be holy. And for someone to really accept a truth, think about that, the passage of scripture, I believe, help my unbelief. Even knowing about yourself, what you believe, what that really means is a complicated subject, complicated notion. Like, how do I know what I believe? How do I know what I really believe? We can't strong arm someone into that. We can lead them to that. And so again, conversation is always gently asking these questions, going back and forth, trying to understand another perspective better.
Sometimes I think we fail in conversation because we forget that God exists. He exists. And it's his fruit, not ours.
It's an amazing act of faith. Having a good conversation is an amazing act of faith, because you're saying, God is God, I am not. The only thing I can do here is to be humble and faithful. That was my theme for today when I was praying the morning office and thinking through this stuff, was humility and faithfulness. To simply, humbly walk with God and just try to be faithful for what he's given me. In a conversation, to play my role well and not to go beyond that because of a lack of faith, because of a mistrust, because of thinking I need to force this. I got to save this person. No. I need to be faithful. I need to be a faithful conversation partner, and I have to want to receive as much as I want to give. That's another piece of this that's so easy to miss, is that there's an influential modern thinker that has said, always assume that the person you're talking to has something to teach you, that you have something to learn from them. You have to go in with that sort of attitude.
Well, conversation allows for the other person to have dignity. When you're in a conversation and you're looking face to face with the other person and you're really trying to understand them, you're really upholding their dignity. Their dignity as a person who is desiring to be known. But I'll never forget, Andrew Reinhardt, a friend of ours, gave a testimony when we were in college.
One of our fellow hosts here on Awaken.
That's right. Check out his podcast.
That's right.
But he gave this talk that I'll never forget, and he gave it on gossip and slander. But he started the talk by describing that words, so our body is a revelation of the soul, like this. I'm probably going to say some heresy here.
Visible, so you need to help me out.
Makes visible the invisible.
The body stuff.
But it can't make visible all things. And so we rational souls have words. And with our words, we express our interior thoughts, and that's a very precious thing. So it's not just I'm saying words out of my mouth, which a lot of times I do just say words out of my mouth. But my words have the ability to express my interior life. And that's what makes gossip and slander such a horrible sin. When you look in the official church laying out of the vices and virtues, gossip and slander are under murder.
Yeah.
Because when you use words to reveal someone else's interior life without their permission or erroneously, it's a kind of murder.
Right.
You're killing them in the eyes of another person.
Right. Because again, that goes back to where we started. Conversation is not ultimately just about like gathering data. It's about it's about that connection with that other person. It's about a relationship. It's about a connection. And so, as you're saying, again, if through our words we kill in the eyes of someone else, another person's inner life, we cast suspicion, we separate their ability to trust one another. Great conversation depends on trust, that we're here together, we're doing this together. This is a common project. This seeking truth and trying to understand truth in each other better, it's a common project, and we're both in this together. I'm not acting like I'm having a conversation, but secretly just trying to like get you to see my, to convince you of something. We're trying to do this together. And so again, as you said, it's such an evil thing to kill another person in someone else's eyes, to separate, to cut them off from one another by the suspicion created.
Yeah, I have a real problem. I've actually stopped friending people I know in real life on social media.
Yeah.
Because I noticed that they were not revealing that information specifically to me.
Right.
And that, for example, like when I meet a new friend now, when I meet a new mom friend, it is so precious when she sits across from me and she reveals like what her wedding was like, or, what her kid did the other day. And I started to feel, and I'm not, against social media or whatever, but I started to feel a little guilty in my own soul that I was like taking information that wasn't mine. It just felt like it made it gave me prejudices in my relationships with real people in my real life. I love keeping in contact with people via social media when they don't live near me, but I really want to guard those relationships that I have in real life. And I don't want to go on my friends, I'm dating myself, on my friends. I don't care to learn another version of social media, but when I go on my friend's Facebook page and I read, like maybe political articles that she's posted, and all of a sudden right there, like it's damaging our relationship and she isn't even there.
Yeah.
She's not even there.
Right.
And it like, I just felt so strongly that I needed to just not friend my real friends in real life anymore so that I could work on the relationship in real life.
Yeah. And obviously there's a dozen other topics embedded in that, on social media and
I'm not anti-social media. I'm not. It's just,
we'll have a good conversation about that at some point.
Part of having good conversation is seeing those things that kind of bristle you, like that moment I just described, and like asking the questions. Right. Why do I kind of feel like I've developed this prejudice against her when I went on her Facebook page? And now when I see her, why was I a little hesitant to like reveal myself to her any further? Like those are important questions to ask when you're pursuing truth.
Going back to something you said earlier about we receive information, but we have to process it. And one of the ways we process it is by having a place to put that out there and to see a reaction and to process it with someone else. If we're creating a world where we can't do that safely, in a place of trust, you have people with a lot of unprocessed, immature notions that they haven't been able to get out there and talk through. If I know as soon as I open my mouth around a friend or a family member about a political opinion or a question I have, that they're going to pounce on me and try to make me see reason and see the light of truth and tell me the latest thing they read on their blog or their news site of choice. Not only can we not have a good conversation, but I have thoughts and feelings and notions and opinions that I can't process anyway. You're not processing an opinion when people are just lobbing rhetoric back and forth at each other. We need to be able to put it out there and get some input and have some good questions asked and go back and forth. And we need to create that for other people. We need to encourage them to do it. If we really care about other people, first of all, we need to recognize that, again, they're not dying for lack of information. People in our world are dying for communion, for relationship. And furthermore, insofar as they are dying from lack of information or bad information, the way that we can most help them is by creating the context, the atmosphere, the scenario, the safe place where they can they can share their heart with us, share their thoughts, share their notions, and we can hear them out, try to understand them, ask good questions, and then again enter into this relationship, enter into this conversation where we can seek truth together. But you have to make place for that trust and build that rapport. And again, even if you really think that someone is wrong, there's always something to learn. Again, that's such an important point. You always go in assuming there's something to learn, because there always is. That the way that person sees the world, why did they see it that way? Mm-hmm. What aspect of the world are they concerned about that makes them hold tightly to that particular opinion? There's something to learn there. And again, if you want to know them better, if you want to give them relationship, if you want to help them, you have to be willing to learn that. You have to be wanting to learn that.
Who's your favorite thinker?
Well, you're going to hear about it a lot, about a lot of our favorite thinkers. Mine is G.K. Chesterton. He was, I would say he's definitely a patron saint of conversation. He's amazing. Agree. We'll have to do some further podcasts about that, because, he's about, 100 or so years ago now. And he was at a time where people of very, very different background, very different philosophy, very different faith, very different opinion would argue vociferously and then go have a pint at the pub afterwards. He was best buddies with Bernard Shaw, and many intellectuals at that time who were socialists and Marxists and atheists, and they respected each other and they had great conversations, and we all benefit from their great conversations now after the fact, but he's definitely a patron for that sort of thing. How about you? You weren't ready for the hard-hitting question, were you? No,
because I don't read a lot of nonfiction.
Who's your favorite Jane Austen character?
Oh, how did you think of that question?
Because you prepped me for it before.
I asked you a question that I don't know the answer. I asked you to ask me a question I don't know the answer to. I think I'm in love with every Jane Austen book that I'm reading currently. I love her funny characters. I really, really love Lady Catherine in Pride and Prejudice, and Mr. Collins. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a hard time with the heroines because I think I have a hard time being kind to women because I am one. I love Pope John Paul II. I know you know that. Mm-hmm. I love him. He was the first person who taught me how to think, even as a historian. When I had my conversion during my graduate degree, I couldn't believe that no one had ever taught me how to think. Not think critically, not analyze the situation, right, but how to ask questions and really attack the answers. But one of the things that people always said about him was that when you were with him, mm-hmm, he was completely present to you. He was there with you. Yeah. He was listening to everything that you were saying. Yeah. And something that he talked about, and I don't know if I have the quote right, but like he would see in each person the irrepeatable quality. The irrepeatable quality. Yeah. That person is singular and you will never have an opportunity to meet that other person. Mm-hmm. And I think that is something that when you're talking about the safe space, the original safe space, guarding that other person's dignity with whom, you're sharing this conversation with. That
reminds me of one of my favorite quotes. Actually, I grabbed it here beforehand. This is a quote from C.S. Lewis. I think this was a sermon he preached, guest preached at a Anglican church or something like that. I think I may have that wrong, but it's one of my favorite quotes by him. And it connects well with this podcast too, because as you'll see, it references ordinariness, ordinary. So quote, "There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, arts, civilizations, these are mortal and their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit. Immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. This does not mean that we are to be perpetually solemn. We must play, but our merriment must be of that kind, and it is, in fact, the merriest kind, which exists between people who have, from the outset, taken each other seriously. No flippancy, no superiority, no presumption." Unquote. There are no ordinary people. Again, it connects with our podcast here a little bit. Of all the things in our life that we might seem ordinary, isn't it a travesty to ever maybe even think or even feel that another person is ordinary, Yeah. But it is something amazing to be in connection with another person. That's what life is about. We're created for relationship. And so to give or to withhold that from someone else, is an eternal matter,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's one of the reasons we like having so many kids. Right. It truly is. I remember when we had our first child. Now, just a little bit of background. Yeah. We can get into this in another This Is Us show or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I never wanted to have children. Never. Maybe I'd adopt some child someday who looked like Harry Potter and had low self-esteem. And gosh darn it, I'd give him self-esteem and love him. How self-serving. Anyway. This is new. But our first child, I don't know what I thought babies would be. Mm-hmm. I mean, I never was around them. Maybe I thought they'd be like cats or something. And then at some point, at some point they'd be like humans. But I remember he was just so intelligent. He was so present from the first moment of his life. Mm-hmm. Well, his external life outside the womb. That our life really became like this giant party all the time. Mm-hmm. We had a third best friend. Like we married each other as best friends. And like every time we have another kid, it's like we're adding another best friend to our family. They're irrepeatable. They are endless in depth. And I mean, they're just endlessly interesting. Our life is so romantic now. It's just such an adventure every moment, every day. Sometimes it feels like you're living in a sitcom. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it feels like Seinfeld, where you're just cringing. You can't believe what is happening and you want it to stop. But it's never boring. Mm-hmm. It's always an adventure. Yeah.
There are no boring things, just boring. There's no really boring people. Rightly considered.
Dang it.
Boring people. Mess that one up. The point is, though, well, again, it's like everything. I mean, the one of the quotes that you were sort of alluding to right there is another favorite Chesterton quote of mine, which is that an adventure is an inconvenience rightly considered. And we are all often inconveniences to one another.
That's right.
That's part of living in family, living in community. But it comes down to how you consider it, how you approach it. Do we count it all as joy? Mm-hmm. Do we see amidst the apparently ordinary the miracles, the amazing inner life,
I remember one time we were talking about my flaws, or I was talking about my flaws.
Very, very short conversation.
I was very, embarrassed. And I remember you had said something along the lines of like, but if you took care of your flaws for me, like.
Oh yeah, I remember. Well, yeah. So it is an interesting dynamic. I'm not even sure I've fully thought through this yet. Mm-hmm. Maybe we'll figure it out here. But it's interesting when you. I think actually the first time I thought about this particular concept was in terms of like dad jokes. We all joke about the terrible, awful dad joke puns, which my father made and makes, and I've inherited, and I make, and you grown, And the thought occurred to me one day. I was joking with I think my brother about dad jokes, and it just occurred to me like we love to joke about them. We love to make fun. Oh, the dad had grown the dad jokes. But what if dad stopped making the dad jokes for us?
Doesn't that just?
I couldn't imagine anything more heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So certainly we obviously, because we love people, if they have real flaws, we hope that they are able to, with God's grace to turn from their sins, whatever. But the little idiosyncrasies, the little things that may be annoying, there are moments when, again, we're inconveniences to one another. But again, if
the person ever stopped doing that because I was annoyed by it, a little part would die. It would be sad,
right?
Yeah.
Our
daughter says hanker sniff instead of handkerchief, and just thinking about like, what if somebody made fun of her for that? Like I almost feel like I'm protecting this little silly thing that she says, but it's like if someone made fun of her for that and she stopped saying it because she was ashamed, that would be so painful. And similarly, like these little faults, these little flaws that each one of us has, like if I made you feel bad about that would it'd be terrible. Yeah,
it's actually, it's another quote from Chesterton. That's going to happen a lot here, and I have to paraphrase this one because I can't remember it exactly. But the principle that he articulates articulates is basically this: if you want to love something, imagine losing it. To love something well, realize that it can be lost. And I can't remember the exact phrasing, but the point being, everything's precious, and oftentimes we don't recognize that until it is lost. So maybe it's, good from time to time to imagine that, to realize just how precious and temporary and fragile things are, so that we can appreciate them while we have them.
And maybe as kind of like a parting challenge
Yes.
for the week or something like that. I mean, imagine that of your relationships, your conversations. What if it was taken from you? Great conversations. What if you couldn't go hang out with your friend anymore in the coffee shop and just dig into some topic that you're really interested about? Maybe act, take advantage of it this week. Sit down, invite someone over. Don't clean your house. We're big no house cleaners. Don't clean your house. Have
Make
people over.
Hospitality easy. Make it simple. Make it stupid simple.
Have people over. Laugh and joke.
Open a bottle of wine.
Get your favorite wine. Have some food and talk about something.
Yeah, and again, I can't reiterate enough that this is not just or not even mostly about information. I think I've said to you lately, and I've been thinking and praying a lot about it, just how comfortable I am with not being proactive in our relationship, like forming habits of sharing my heart and conversation, the things that we value so much in theory. I'm so comfortable in practice in the day-to-day to just keep it to myself, but conversation, sharing our hearts, that's where real relationship is built. And so sometimes we don't feel like it. Get to the end of the week, get to date night, and we're just exhausted. But what do we usually do? We pull out a good book, or we turn on a podcast. We put something out there to spark, and not because the information is the most important thing in the world. Again, that's not what we're dying for, is more information. It's that we have something. We want to
know and be known.
Yeah.
We're dying for it. Yeah. We're yearning for it. Yeah. I want to give just a little plug real quick for a little game called Vertellus. We had bought it on a whim. It's for couples, but I think they've made other editions like for families or something like that.
I think it originally wasn't for couples. We made a couples edition.
Okay, well, we have the couples edition. And they have these little questions that you ask each other that really get you thinking in an excited, outside of the box, positive way. I mean, I just can't say enough about it. So it's called Vertellus. We'll link it.
So, there you have it. Again, thank you for joining us for this conversation. We're hoping to have a lot more. We hope you'll join us for a lot more. We hope we inspire some good conversations with you.
We've got a few interesting topics that we'd love to dive into. If you have any conversations, please let us know. Yeah. We're looking for maybe like a practicing virtue in the election season with a special guest, or
again, back to the title, Elevate Ordinary. So, one of our big things as a couple in our conversations is just about how easy it is to compartmentalize faith. It's over here. It's where we pray. We go to mass. We do stuff over here. And then there's all the rest of my life. But the reality is all that stuff, all that, again, apparently ordinary stuff, is what God gives us. It's the raw material with which he wants to build the life that we have. But it depends on us lifting those things up, elevating those ordinary things, and cherishing them and digging into them and practicing virtue with them. And so, we want to talk about family life. We want to talk about
hospitality,
finances,
evangelization,
time,
gardening. It's almost spring.
Lord of the Rings. I got my Lord of the Rings cup here. All kinds of stuff. Got lots of ideas. And so, again, thank you for joining us for this conversation, and we hope you do again soon. This episode is sponsored by Rob Huller at Key Realty. Rob's a good friend of ours, a great guy to work with when you're looking for your next family home or your first family home. He's a good guy, cares a lot about families, a lot about Catholic social teaching, a lot about ownership, the property as the art of democracy, as we've talked about on the show many times. Check him out, Rob Huller at Key Realty.